you. That's all good.
Oh, well, hi everyone. I'm Deon Utber. I'm the regional leader for conservation down on the south coast. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. My apologies for anyone who's been to the South Coast Dieback Forum before, because you will see some pictures you've seen before. But I think we're in the minority in terms of the people from the South Coast. Make sure I've got the technology right. No. Upside down. So I'm just going to do a real quick fly through over the last 15 years, right up to what we're doing currently for dieback management on the South Coast. So back in the 1990s, before I was down on the South Coast, there was a whole suite of dieback interpretation. It was included, dieback was included as a key threat into many of the management plans over some really important areas such as the Stirlings and Fitzgerald River National Park. And as a result of that, there was a lot of work into access management, establishment of some washdown pads, restricted areas, and installation of some of the at the time, the current technology for hygiene infrastructure, which is that tray there that has a brush in it, and you lift off the lid and you brush your boot and you put the lid back on. There was quite a bit of work in there to do dieback management and protect some of those areas that had TECs and dieback population, DRF populations. And we started using aerial phosphate in the Stirling Range National Park, which is an amazing place, and I'm so privileged to be working in an area where we're managing that park. But unfortunately, it has been largely impacted by Phytophthora dieback, and the endemic and unique flora and threatened ecological communities that occur in that area have been subject to dieback, and you can see on the screen there some of the areas of dieback deaths up on those peaks, and that then can lead to landslips as well, with the reduction of biomass in those areas. And so we've been using aerial phosphate to try and target some of those areas that are left to reduce the impacts of dieback on those areas, and it has been successful in slowing and halting the decline in some of those areas. But it's an ongoing maintenance program. It's intensive, it's expensive, and it's helped to buy some time in terms of getting in situ conservation strategies in place, such as seed collection, translocation into other areas where we can establish seed banks for some of those threatened flora. We've also had to deal with other threatening processes such as grazing of germinants, it has had some success in those areas that have been sprayed. We're seeing up to 75% survival versus in areas that are unsprayed, where it basically devastates that population of DRF. Many other challenges such as bushfire, and in the last in 2 years we've had some pretty devastating impacts from bushfire, with nearly half the park being burnt through bushfire. So moving into the 2000s, we started looking into strategies such as containment and eradication. We worked closely with CPSM, and the NRM Project Dieback took off, and we saw things such as the strategic dieback mapping across the southwest, and undertaking the first round of regional dieback planning. It identified some pretty important areas. The Fitzgerald River National Park is largely uninfested, though it does have some infestations in the park, but it's around about 3 up to 5% that has infestations in the park. And one of the areas that was first infestations was a place called Beltrack, and we went through a pretty intensive period from 2007 through to about 2010, and TILA was involved in this towards the end, where we had a micro catchment that had a dieback infestation in it from a mining exploration event, where a dirty bulldozer went in there, unauthorised, and introduced dieback into the park. And in that micro catchment, we did detailed studies on topography and hydrology, and we established some containment structures around that infestation to be able to contain it in that micro catchment. And we were lucky that that micro catchment drained into some sumps that drained deep into underground aquifers, and we haven't seen any expression outside of that that particular infestation, and we have an exclusion fence around it to exclude animals from vectoring that disease through the park. So we did detect some other infestations through that exercise, because we did some aerial survey across the park, and we did pick up some other infestations, albeit that they were small and contained. But one of the key things that we recognised was that our infrastructure around hygiene needed some upgrades. It was, thinking back to that 1990 slide, it was old, it was ineffective, and so we needed to start looking at how we could upgrade and improve our capacity to undertake hygiene in not only the Fitzgerald River National Park, but also Cape Harrod, which is largely uninfested as well, but it's got extensive areas of susceptible vegetation. And so here at East Mount Barron, you can see that we started putting in some infrastructure where we could manage hygiene, and particularly for machinery and large equipment that were coming in when undertaking bushfire mitigation. And on the left-hand side there, you will see that we also look at washdowns are only effective if you are able to contain the effluent and manage the effluent. Otherwise, you have the risk of, if it's a dieback-free area, of establishing a dieback infestation in that location. So at all of our ranger stations, we established these washdown facilities, and this is the Jacob area, and that light blue area was previously all gravel, and so that all became sealed so that we could manage our washdown and then move the vehicles and bushfire fighting equipment off onto a hard stand after we've cleaned it, allowed them, so that we're not just picking up more material from that gravel car park. So we're starting to get to a point where we're able to handle or getting better in managing our hygiene requirements, but we also then had infestations in some areas that were pretty important, and so how do we address those? This is about the same time that that Bill and CPSM were coming down and doing some eradication trials. I did some out of Cape Rich, and then we had a location out in Cape Harrod, which is in deep sands in Banksia speciosa communities, a small infestation, probably the size of one of these tables, where we undertook an eradication trial. And so you can see there that they've got the tractor, they're kitted up in their COVID wear, and they're doing some decontamination of the soil, where we're using methane sodium to fumigate the soils. The vegetation was removed. We created basically a tennis court, and did a subsequent number of years of spraying using herbicides to remove any material there for the infestation to persist in that soil. And so currently that's now 10 years on, and we don't have any positive returns of dieback in that area. One note on that though, it is in deep sand, and you in a soil where you've got clay material, it's not going to be effective, because the idea is that you permeate the soil with the methane sodium as a gas, and if you've got clay soils, you're just not going to get that permeation. So in 2010, BHP and the Ravenswood nickel operations closed down, and there was a stimulus package into the area, which originally involved a proposed road from Hopetown through the Bremer Bay through the middle of the Fitz. Soon became quite apparent that it was such a special place that wasn't really appropriate, and that the money that the government was putting up was not going to be enough to create a Great Ocean Road type road. But what we were left with was main roads coming in to do the stimulus package and develop some sealed roads into the Fitzgerald River National Park. So we're talking about a major road construction in an area that's of high importance, and there's a number of risks for the biodiversity in that area, and particularly in relation to dieback, which was highlighted in a referral to the EPBC, where we had to meet some specific conditions into managing dieback. In that partnership with Main Roads, we developed an environmental assessment and approval process, and some key components of that included a code of conduct around managing dieback, establishing some hygiene plans, undertaking dieback surveys, and auditing the process of the construction itself. And that's where the green card came from. That's where we originally came up with the concept of the green card, and we started rolling it out with Main Roads, and then we have rolled it out since, and the likes of Chris Dunn and Mike Pez, Colin Crane took that green card, developed it into a fuller package, which has then been taken up by a dieback working group and turned into a full program, both within DBCA and externally. And here's just some pictures of this type of scale that we were working at, where we've got the major construction, we've got major machinery, and it was managed at a very fine scale. When they were doing the clearing, they were cleaning down on a micro catchment scale. So from one catchment to the next at a micro catchment scale, they would clean down, move the machinery over, and commence in the next catchment. And we were very lucky to have someone like Mel Grant, who some people will know, a dieback interpreter and very experienced bushman working in this area as the environmental officer. But not long after that, we moved into the phase of the state dieback investment framework that South Coast NRM was a leader in, and identifying some of those special areas across the southwest, but also in the South Coast, that required an asset-based approach to managing the risks of dieback. We undertook some planning in the Stirlings, looking at areas of importance within PPAs, and how do we start targeting our investment into the most effective areas where we will get the most bang for buck, because money is limited. And so in the Western Stirlings PPA, one of the activities that we undertook was looking at doing some fine-scale dieback mapping. And so we used plane-borne aerial imagery to start capturing some of the dieback infestations in those areas, and so that we can start better targeting our management to protect areas that were at higher risk. And we started getting some fine scale mapping across some of those PPAs to inform our management. And so we have been rolling that out into other areas as well. And so this is at Lake Gore, so in the Stokes area, which is also a priority protection area. And we're able to, at a finer scale, identify areas of risk and start managing our activities, and also our infrastructure to manage people, because our people are one of the greatest risks in moving this infestation through some of these special areas and these priority protection areas. We also have some boot cleaning stations that were designed through the Fitzgerald Improvement Project. And one of the we were aware of and looked at the Phytophthora as an option. But if you've got someone coming from the Stirlings, then visiting the Fitz, they've taken their footwear from the Stirlings to the Fitz, and then they're starting to clean down using the Phytophthora, which has a grate, which then falls onto the ground underneath it. You have the risk of creating an infestation at that point. And so what we wanted to build into some of these boot cleaning stations was a containment strategy. And so these, you can see down in the diagram on the bottom right, have a containment well, and so that'll capture the material which falls through the FRP, fiberglass reinforced plastic grating, and into that containment well. And we did some calculations on the depth of the well and how much it would, how deep it would need to be to allow for evaporation. So if you've got winter rains, that it's not going to overflow. So at times we do need to go in there and evacuate those wells. And four-wheel drives are a constant pressure on these areas, and so we've been looking at areas that have infestations in it and a high degree of four-wheel drive activity into those areas, and how we can try and manage the risk of infestations getting into some of these dieback-free areas in the PPAs. And so we've got areas that are very wet and with a high degree of four-wheel drive activity, and we've tried to minimise and separate that movement of vehicles away from those wet areas. And but it's you do this in 3 or 4 or 5 years, you've got to come back and start looking at doing maintenance on these areas. So it becomes a quite intensive and expensive operation. And in other areas as well, this is in Cape Harad, where we've got creek lines. You can be more targeted into the areas that you need to get that separation from hydrology. Something else that that I've been working on for a number of years now is to provide our staff with tools to be able to try and make more convenient and greater uptake of things such as undertaking a hygiene inspection on your vehicle prior to going out and doing field activities. So this was a little app, and this is me trying to type into my app very poorly. That captures, it prompts the user through, I think we saw previously, I think it was in Brett's presentation, a vehicle inspection sheet. And so this runs through the same types of inspections that you have to undertake. And with this particular app, it captures the information, uploads it to an online spreadsheet, and so you have a record of the inspection. And so if you do get some breach or you get an infestation, you can start looking back through your management activities and see where something might have failed in that process. This is through a program called, well, it's actually a website called AppSheet, and it links in with Office 365, but we recently have gone to another platform called EpiCollect 5. Most recently, with the efforts of our environmental health branch and EMA and Ian, we've gone through a developing a dieback risk assessment and management planning process to build on the process that we had before, where we can look at disturbance activities in the context of the type of activity. So, for example, putting in a post or a DRF marker versus bringing in a machine to upgrade a road or undertake grading activities, and look at the relative risk of that activity and introducing or spreading dieback, and then develop a hygiene management plan around that, whether we apply basic dieback risk principles or we go through a full dieback hygiene plan where we establish clean on entry points and clean downs and an auditing process. For the fits, we've also gone through and developed a dieback protection plan that's specific to the fits, which has led into prioritising what we do when we get opportunities for undertaking additional works for dieback mitigation, such as the work that we're currently doing with South Coast NRM. That brings us to 2020, and so we've got the priority protection areas. We're looking at doing some phosphite spraying in an area that's posing a higher degree of risk than it previously has. We're looking at upgrading some signage, and the sign here is an old Fitzgerald Biosphere sign, because the Fitzgerald Biosphere is a UNESCO Mountain in the Biosphere reserve, and we've recently upgraded that listing. We've reinvigorated the Biosphere group, and we'll be working with them on some signage to promote that with a dieback message as well. And I think there's an opportunity we mentioned yesterday about lifting the profile of some of these priority protection areas. This is an international listed biosphere, and there's an opportunity to do that, to give it a similar status to a World Heritage Area. You're stepping into somewhere that's incredibly special, and you undertake your activities with respect to that. We're also looking at doing some access management in that Stokes coast area, Stokes Inlet, so the area between the Fitz and Esperance, and also out into Cape Arid as well. And so we'll be looking at improving our access for recreational use, and trying to manage people's recreational activity in those areas, and guide them into areas that are of lower risk than higher risk. And it can be quite difficult. You can see there that we don't, in these kind of landscapes, have natural barriers to corral people into the areas that we want them to recreate on or drive on. And so we have to use things such as wing gates out into either side of our gates to try and encourage them to not drive around the gates. So, quick fly through on what's happening on the south coast. It's always quite busy down there. We're always trying to think outside the box and work closely with our partners.
Thanks, Deon.
With the scale of the work we have here is kind of mind-blowing. So, do we have any questions for?
Hi. Have you ever had to implement more serious barriers for people that insist on accessing them?
Absolutely.
Well,
So in the Fitzgerald River National Park, it's 300,000 hectares. Within the management plan of it, it identifies a wilderness management zone in the central area of it. And so you need, previously you needed a special permit to enter into that area, even to do operational management activities. But we were constantly having people going in there who have historical usage in that area to go camping and fishing. We installed gates, they broke down the gates. We installed barriers, they went around the barriers. So we got a large machine which was clean and destroyed the tracks. And so that included ripping the tracks and mounting the tracks so that they were undrivable, which makes it a challenge for us in terms of how we manage that area for things such as bushfire and prescribed fire. But that was a compromise that we undertook to be able to protect the area from further invasion of or infestation of dieback. And what really stimulated that was a new infestation in 2012 on Drummond Track, which really sort of drove home the risk.
thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the impact of fire on Phytophthora in the Sterling ranges. You had that huge, devastating fire you said wiped out roughly half. Do you know how that might affect the infestation in it?
There was a study, a post-grad study that was done by Nicole Moore that looked at the interaction of natural soil biota and dieback post-fire. And her study showed that post-fire, that the natural biota that would normally compete and reduce the impacts of Phytophthora were not as available in the soil post-fire, and so it gave Phytophthora a more a better environment to be more vigorous. So yes, definitely post-fire, Phytophthora is more virulent, and also because on the northern slopes of the Sterlings, where you get that heating from the solar effect, that makes it more conducive to dieback as well. And with the removal of canopy, it provides a more suitable environment for Phytophthora.
Yeah, thanks. And is that a ready colonisation, or that it's able to persist in such a hot fire?
Oh no, it definitely persists. Once it's there, it's always there. Yeah.
It's a really quick clarification. The eradication trial said the infestation was about the size of one of these tables, and you cleared a tennis court sized area as a buffer zone?
Yeah, as a buffer zone, yeah, because you know because we had to destroy the root material, and you also have the encroachment of roots into that area. And so you know if you only had a metre buffer and you've got live vegetation that far away, then the incursion of that root material might provide some material for the Phytophthora to sustain.
Right. Thanks, guys. We might break. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.